Hey, this is Jonathan Gilliam, and I'm about to start the show. And, listen, it wouldn't be the start of the show if I didn't just do one little short commercial about my best-selling book, Sheep Know More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It'll show you how attackers look at you. There's some stories in there as well about my time in the FBI and gives you some insight in how SEALs think in the Navy. But overall, the book is techniques, or a technique, the attack and defend technique, that will show you how to look at yourself like an attacker and then turn around and use that information to build better defenses, better overall awareness, and plans of action when you just can't change something, but you still have to be there. Now, several of my buddies in the protective services have reached out to me and said that they are now using the workbooks to do all of their threat assessment and site surveys before they protect somebody. That's a compliment, but it also shows you the reality of what I've done is given you the tools that professionals use without all the industry lingo and in an interesting way. I literally wrote the book as though I was writing it for my mom, so I took out all the operator language so that she could understand it, and she found it useful. She also found it interesting. Now, she is my mom, but let me just tell you, she's right. And for the children, The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. It's a book of pictures with the whole team there. You got Jesse and Rico and Bonnie Sue and Meow Meow. Those are the characters. And each picture has about 5 lessons of awareness and communication and safety for children, basically about 2 to 8 years old. And the parent goes to teamlittlebigs.com and gets the lesson plan. So you give the child the book, and then you point out the lessons repeatedly for them. It's also great for learning disabled children. I've actually had some parents review the book who have autistic children. They said it was great and an effective way to repeat the lessons so that they understand them. Sheep Know More, The Art of Awareness and Attack Survival. It's 2 workbooks, so you can apply it. And The Adventures of Team Little Bigs, a parent's book for children. Listen, the whole thing, you know what it does? It makes your homeland safer. Go get them wherever books are sold. And let's start the show.
The truth has arrived.
My name is Jonathan Gilliam, and this is The Experts. And welcome back to the show. It's Tuesday, and I say Tuesday, everybody always laughs because I still have a Southern accent, especially when I go home to Arkansas. It really kicks in. But even after being in New York for 16 years, it's hard to believe I've been here for this long. But it's true, and it's really gone downhill. And what's interesting about New York is that not only is it, the fashions start here and the trends start in New York, but you could see the way the country was starting to crumble at the rapid pace it was starting to crumble by the way New York started to crumble. And Bloomberg, it really kind of started, it went up with Giuliani, and then Bloomberg kind of took it to that level where it just kind of started to go, it kind of hit that peak and then started to go downhill again. And from where it was before Giuliani. Now, Bloomberg didn't do all bad. I mean, I would say he kind of kept the status quo, but he was an appeaser. He was an appeaser. That's what he did. He appeases people. And that's a dangerous game to play. You can keep the status quo, but if you start to appease the left, as they have shown, they will take a mile. And once you give them a mile, they will browbeat you and just start taking everything else, because what they do is they take that mile. They don't just take a mile. When you offer an inch, you've heard that thing, give them an inch, they take a mile. They don't just take a mile. They go put people in specific locations as to cause the most turmoil and putting people in a position of authority based on things like race and gender and all these different things that in society right now, if you say something about the wrong person, you're going to get accused of being a racist or sexist or whatever. You can't just criticize somebody anymore. And it comes from when you give into that even a little bit, they will take that further and further and further. So when you look at New York, you saw that happening to New York, and it was it was an example of what was going to occur in the nation. It was coming. It was going to happen. So that's basically where we are now. I mean, as New York has completely gone downhill, and as New York has completely trashed itself by the voting in terrible leaders again and again and again, further and further left, people who do not know how to handle crisis. I mean, most people don't even, in New York and around the country, they don't even think about crisis when they hire these people. They just simply think, do they meet my special interest? That's all. That's all they think about. And so what they end up getting, I used to know somebody whose mother was conservative through and through, but she would only vote for people who were pro-choice. That was her thing. The one thing, that's the only way she chose a president or a leader or a politician was based on whether or not they were pro-choice. Even though she was conservative, she was still pro-choice. And that's the only thing, and I'm sure she was pro-choice because she probably had an abortion when she was younger. And in order to justify that in her brain, she had to make it, right. And so she made it into, like everybody else does, this issue about a woman's right to kill an unborn child. And so that's the one thing that she voted on, regardless of the fact that the people that she was voting for were leftists. They were pure leftists every single time. And it goes further you go down that rabbit hole. If you stick to your special interest, that's what will happen. So, I'm kind of explaining this, but saying these things, but I'm actually going to another point through all this. What's happened in the nation was not a secret. It was out there. We could see it. As I just said a minute ago, New York is a perfect example. There's other cities where you see this. It happens there first and then kind of progresses. But yesterday when I watched Tucker Carlson had Naomi Wolf on there, and it's interesting because she's a former Clinton advisor, and now she's lecturing on the threat of totalitarianism. And it's happening before our eyes. Now, again, I agreed with everything that she said in this, okay? And it's very interesting. Tucker Carlson you could see he was kind of surprised by the fact that this is who he was talking to about what he was talking about. But she was, and I'll play part of her interview. She was right on everything with the exception of one thing. And that was the fact that she said it's happened quickly. But it didn't happen quickly. It's been happening, as I've said, over and over again in this nation since at least the 1940s, probably way before that. Now, I just got through, literally just a few minutes ago as I'm recording this, I just got through tweeting out about this. And I'm going to kind of go through that series of tweets. There's about 5 tweets. And it kind of laid it out in response to, to her interview. I thought her interview was great, but there was that one particular thing that she said. What strikes me about this is 2 things. One is that, here's somebody who was a Clinton advisor, somebody that was in the inner circle of not just the Clintons, not just the Democrat Party, but politics. And it just reinforces what I keep saying about people who are in the dangers of being in law enforcement, or especially in federal law enforcement, okay? It's very, very dangerous when you're in there and this move towards totalitarianism or tyranny is happening. You may be blinded, just like all the people I used to know in the FBI that thought that James Comey was a great person, and all the while I'm sitting back here going, how do you not see what he's doing? How do you not see this? And they just did not see it because they're too close. Now, I know I've used this terminology before on this show, but imagine if you were looking like there's a mural painted on a wall and you are a foot from the wall. Let's say your nose is pressed against the wall. You're not going to, and the mural is 100 feet tall. You're not going to be able to see the reality of that mural until you back up 5 feet and you can't move your head up left or right. You can just put your head forward. You're still not going to be able to see it all. You're going to have to get back a long ways before you can actually see the reality of what that mural actually is on that wall that's 100 feet tall. Well, it's the same thing when you're in the government. You're not going to see things clearly. I know it sounds weird, but when you're in it, you don't see it the same way. Just like, young kids, when they hang around in popular groups and they're nasty to other people, they may not realize how they're being to other people because they're in the group. And some good kids can actually get sucked into that. But it's the same thing for people like Naomi Wolf, who is or was an advisor for the Clintons. She's up close to them. And all the while, this stuff is occurring, and she doesn't see it, right? She doesn't see it for whatever reason because she's too close. And once she gets out and gets away from it, and this stuff continues to speed up, it's become more apparent to her. So I wanted to play some of her interview with Tucker Carlson. Let me pull it up here. And what you're going to see, or you're going to hear, is a person who's truly woke, a person who was a part of the system and now has stepped back from that wall with that great mural of totalitarianism on it. And wow, all of a sudden, it seems like it's just happened really quickly. Well, it hasn't happened quickly. It's been going on.
One person who apparently is not afraid to speak up is Naomi Wolf, who is undoubtedly losing friends by appearing on the show tonight. She's the author of The End of America, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot, and the CEO of Daily Clout. She joins us tonight. Naomi Wolf, I appreciate your coming on. I never thought I would be talking to you except in a debate format. I'm sure we disagree on an awful lot. But on this, I was struck by the bravery it must have taken you to write it. I'm sure you lost friends over it and for doing this. Tell us why you're doing this and why you wrote that.
Well, it's not just first of all, thank you, Tucker. I'm really happy to be talking to you. It's not just that one tweet. I've been writing pretty much every day for months and months about what I see as the terrible crisis that we're in, that we have to recognize under the guise of a real medical pandemic. We're really moving into a coup situation, a police state situation, and that's not a partisan thing. That, as you say, that transcends everything you and I might agree or disagree on.
Right.
That should bring together left and right to protect our Constitution. We're absolutely moving into what I call step 10. I wrote a book in which I pointed out there were 10 steps that would-be tyrants always take when they want to close down a democracy. Whether they're on the left or the right, they always do the same 10 things. And now we're at something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. You described it really, really well. It is step 10, and that's the suspension of the rule of law. That's when you start to be a police state. And
okay, so let me stop her right there, because here's where, and let me give you the 10 steps that she says in her book, The End of America, Letter of Warning to a Young Patriot. Okay, I believe that's the name of the book. So here's the 10 steps. Invoke a terrifying internal and external enemy. Now that's been going on. I'm going to go through these steps, right? And this is what I tweeted out earlier to her. Was that, again, I think I said this earlier, was that I agree with 99% of what she said, but it's not, it hasn't just happened, right? This has been going on for a long time, but like I was saying, she was too close to it. So invoke a terrifying internal and external enemy. Now that's been going on, right? The external enemy, especially, it was the Cold War, it was Vietnam, it was, well, I do believe that World War II and the Koreans were both real. The Vietnamese in the Vietnam War had to do with communism, so it was real as well. But you see how we go from these external enemies to external enemy. The difference between World War II and after is that the DOD started to become politicized, and war became a political thing. It's always been political, but they stopped fighting wars to conquer the enemy, and they started fighting wars to basically get their political to win politics, to win political races. That's basically why they went to war. It made no sense the way Nixon and the rest of the presidents from there forward have fought wars. Just didn't make any sense. So they've always constantly used that extremely dangerous and terrifying external enemy. The global war on terror is probably the greatest one. The war on drugs is the same thing, but those are two wars that they never have ever really tried to win. Many men and women have lost their lives because they didn't fight the war to win the war. They fought the war for political reasons, and that's how we found ourselves in Iraq and Afghanistan, and without any real dent 20 years later. So that external enemy has always been there. Internal enemies have varied. Islam was the proposed, enemy in the United States. Also, the war on drugs and the drug dealers and the high crime, and those are internal enemies. Trust me. Now it's white. It's and before that it was black people. Let's say back in the 60s and the 70s, it was black people. They were the terrifying internal enemy. And then as we got, the equal rights came forward and people got smarter and realized that, hate itself is the enemy, not the people that you're hating. But it's progressed throughout the years, and now it's the white devil. Now it's nationalism, people who love patriots, who love their country. Now they're the terrifying internal enemy. Remember all of the early 2000s after 9/11, it was Islam. And rightfully so, the fundamental Muslims who, consistently carried out large attacks. But the threat of those attacks was, and the size and scope of those attacks was never truly recognized by the government, and was overblown in a lot of cases by saying, never pinning things down and saying to the people that we can't tell you if there's a known threat or not. I mean, we don't know that there's a threat, but it doesn't mean that there's not a threat. And never really did anything to prepare the American people or empower them to stand against these things. So why? Because they don't want to solve these problems. This is what the government does, especially a totalitarian government. So that's number one on her list. That's been going on for a long time. Create secret prisons where torture takes place. Okay. I don't necessarily think that has occurred in the way that she thinks it's occurred. But yes, there were secret prisons where enhanced interrogation took place, but I wouldn't say that the way that she's actually stating it, I don't think she understands the list that she created herself, because when they're talking about create a secret prison and where torture takes place, when it comes to totalitarianism, really it has to do with people torturing people and sending them to these secret prisons because they are individuals who stand against their own nation, or again, not against their own nation, but against the totalitarian government. We really haven't seen the secret prisons and stuff so far where our own people are taken because they disagree with the government. Those are coming, but let's see. The third one, develop a thug caste and paramilitary force not answerable to the citizens. Well, yes, it's called federal law enforcement. And in certain states, it's called the local and state law enforcement. Yes, I've been a cop. I've been in the FBI, but I think law enforcement has been bastardized and it is used. I remember being a part of an operation in the FBI where we arrested almost the entire upper echelon of a police department. Literally everybody except for their detectives and cops on the street. Everybody was arrested because they were criminal. But there are the whole structure in which law enforcement works now and the way they perceive the people is wrong. And they are being used as a paramilitary force. There is a caste system. And really, to be honest with you, now it's not even so much law enforcement. I mean, they are a part of it. But Silicon Valley, they are the thugs of the thug caste system. They're the ones who are brutalizing free speech and promoting aggression towards the Second Amendment. That's who the thugs are now. They're not thugs going out and beating you up in the street. They're thugs that are literally preventing you from even existing to have a voice. Number 4 on her list, set up an internal surveillance system. Well, 9/11, I mean, it's always kind of been there a little bit, but 9/11 really kicked that into overdrive. Infiltrate and harass citizens groups. Well, that's gone full circle. I mean, used to be in the you could say that in the 60s and 70s that they harassed these groups, but those were true terrorist groups. Those were leftist, subversive terrorist groups. The Weather Underground, all those different leftist communist groups, who, by the way, many of them work now for Biden and worked in the Obama administration or have been in colleges and universities all over the country teaching for the past 50 years. So that's already been going on. Infiltrate and harass citizens groups. That's been going on for a long time. Again, used or carried out by not just the politicians in the way that whoever's in office is going to, kind of, well, really the Republicans never really do that type of stuff. It's always been the Democrats who carry out that type of thuggery. But it's the really Silicon Valley, social media in general, the news media. They're the ones who infiltrate and harass citizens groups. They're the ones that if you have a Facebook group and you say the wrong thing, it's taken down. That's the same thing. It's the same exact thing. And Antifa and all these different people who have constantly throughout the years been infiltrating and harassing. But this has been going on for a long, long period of time. Engage in arbitrary detention and release. It's happened, but she's equating this probably because she's liberal. She's probably equating that to the Muslims and because of the war on terror. I mean, again, the totalitarian leader is not going to be doing that so much to an external source that is not affecting their power inside their nation. So I don't really know if we've gotten to that point yet. Number 7, target key individuals. Well, yeah, of course. Look at Kennedy. Look at Bobby Kennedy. Look at Malcolm X. Look at Martin Luther King Jr. There's been this type of assassination has been going on for the longest time. It's been happening. Key individuals who have a lot to say and who criticize these powerful people get silenced. Look at Bernie Kerik. Bernie Kerik is a perfect example. He didn't get killed, but he got put in prison. In prison where for the same thing that these politicians get off on all the time for doing these types of things. Control the press. Yes, that's definitely been happening longer than most of us even realize. I as a kid, and a teenager, and even in my 20s and 30s, I didn't realize how leftist that the media actually was. I was naive to that. Cast criticism. This is number 9. Cast criticism and espionage and dissent as treason. So criticism will be cast as espionage. So if you criticize somebody, you're committing espionage. And if you dissent with what the government says, then you're accused of treason, right? Not actually carrying out treason, which is actually been done by many people in government, or espionage, which has been done by many people in politics. This criticism as espionage and dissent as treason is being done to patriots and has been happening that way for well over 5 years. And I mean, you could go back even further than that, by the left. That's what the left does. I mean, Saturday Night Live has always been kind of this, where they would do this stuff kind of underhanded, insulting of conservatives, typically conservatives on Saturday Night Live. They would mix it with some funny stuff when the liberals would do stupid stuff, but you can kind of tell who the in crowd is by what Saturday Night Live would always criticize, and it's gotten so worse where they're not even funny over the past 10 years. They just simply support leftists and totally crush anybody on the right, and even they make these jokes. ESPN is the same way, where they go out and they get political. Instead of talking about sports, they just go political. And how am I equating that to that? But, well, because just like I talked about in yesterday's show, when the narrative that somebody is creating, they go in media and they just say over and over and over and over again in different media outlets, eventually the media will repeat what they're saying. Well, it's the same thing here. You know, they can put people in categories, not just by reporting in the news, not just by politicians saying it, but they can put it in things like Sesame Street or the Disney Channel or ESPN or any of these types of things. They'll put this type of dissent in there, Saturday Night Live, whatever, and they will create this narrative. At the same time they're doing it, the media is doing it. And remember, you tell these things over and over again enough, people start to believe them. Now, where she said number 10, she can't believe that we're here where the rule of law has been subverted. Well, I mean, that's been going on for a long time. Now the difference is, which really should be the true example of totalitarianism, is not the subversion of the law. It's, if you really want to know when a totalitarian leader has arrived, it's because the subversion becomes overt and the rule of law is overtly manipulated. That's really how you can tell that a tyrannical type or a totalitarian type of leader or political party is in office. That's the way that you can tell. Let's listen to a few more minutes of her.
We're here. There's no way around it.
I'm so embarrassed, and it's another example, there are a million of them, of why partisanship is stupid, and it makes you stupid. And I guess I just assumed that we wouldn't agree on stuff, so I didn't read your tweets, and I obviously should have been, and I missed a lot. And so, again, it's nice to remember you should treat people as individuals rather than as stand-ins for whole political parties. You have been predicting this for a long time, you just said. Why don't you think others aren't seeing this?
Let's see what she says here.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people are seeing it, but we're not unified. And as you pointed out, we're a very divided country for a lot of cynical reasons. I'm in touch with many patriots from all backgrounds and all walks of life who are horrified. I interviewed, for instance, Moms for Liberty, a group of conservative moms in Florida who are mobilizing to try to get schools open. They're so worried about what's happening to their kids. And I talked to Mom Jen Say, a famous gymnast and activist in San Francisco on the left, who's also a mom who's horrified. I've interviewed doctors, I've interviewed, ordinary people, restaurant owners from all walks of life who are absolutely unable to even articulate their fear and horror, recognizing that the state has now crushed businesses, kept us from gathering in free assembly to worship, as the First Amendment provides, is invading our bodies, as you mentioned, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, is restricting movement, fining us here in New York State. I could be fined $15,000 a day if I gather people, more than 10 or 25 people, depending on where in New York State I live, which is a complete violation of the First Amendment. I mean, the violations go on and on and on. I've talked to restaurant owners who are looking at a sector in which tens of thousands of small businesses have been crushed. And why were they crushed? Not because of pandemic forced them to. There is no real science underlying a lot of these closures. It's because autocratic tyrants at the state and now the national level are creating a kind of merger of corporate power and government power, which is really characteristic of Italian fascism in the 1920s. And they're using that to engage in kind of emergency orders that simply strip us of our rights to property, rights to assembly, rights to worship, and all of the rights that our Constitution guarantees. So people are definitely horrified and noticing. I think people are shocked and divided, as I mentioned before. And the other thing that happened is, you said this has all been very sudden. And when you look back, March of 2020, a lot of things started to move that kind of locked into place a set of policies that are kind of 360-degree full-on totalitarian policies. So I think a lot of us are kind of in culture shock. Luckily or unluckily, I've been studying closing democracies for 12 years, so I recognized early on, once I realized New York State had emergency powers, I know from history that no one gives up emergency powers willingly. They always drag it on and drag it on. And so every month I'm getting in my email an announcement that Governor Cuomo is extending emergency measures. Only from studying history do I know how predictable it is when you start to have elected officials say, we are not going to follow the Constitution because there's a pandemic. And I just want to say lastly, and then I promise I'll stop, nowhere in the Constitution does it say all this can be suspended if there's a bad disease. We have lived through typhus, cholera, smallpox, HIV, tuberculosis, polio, the Spanish flu. We've lived through an attack on our soil. Never have there been months and months and months of emergency powers when we weren't actually fighting a war. So this is completely unprecedented. Lockdowns have never been done before in free societies, and really we're turning into a version of a totalitarian state sort of before everyone's eyes. And I really hope we wake up quickly, because history also shows that it's a small window in which people can fight back before it's too dangerous to fight back.
Oh my gosh, she sounds like somebody who's trying, does she want to fight the government? I'm making a joke here, but she sounds just like patriots when they were talking about on January 6th about why they were showing up. I'm not talking about the people that necessarily went in and, well, even them. What happened on January 6th was because of exactly what she's saying. Listen, I agree with her wholeheartedly. But as I just went through her list, the fact is some of those things we haven't reached yet. As she was explaining, the fall can be very quick, and there's a small window there where you can actually fight back against this. Otherwise, the state gets too powerful. And New York is, again, a good example, because right now, if you do something, law enforcement's not going to stop it, right? The local governments aren't going to stand up for you. You do something like she said, where you have more than 10 people or 12 people over or in your restaurant for a certain period of time, they're going to fine you $15,000 a day. So they've already reached a point where the enforcers are doing the bidding of the totalitarian leaders. Ted Nugent, when he was getting off the plane to come and play the guitar for the national anthem for a Back the Blue rally, they wouldn't let him off the plane. They said he'd be arrested if he did. That was last summer. There was no law. They said you could come to New York for 24 hours, but they didn't want him there because he's conservative. So that totalitarian type of rule, they actually imposed it on him. So when we look at what she's saying, I agree with her, but the one thing that I don't agree with her, I didn't hear Tucker say this, but if he's saying that this is happening quickly, they're wrong. They're wrong. Here's what has occurred, okay, and this is what I tweeted about earlier, is that the pace at which it's occurring has sped up. So, for years and years, Hitler was in the pubs, making speeches, working for the Socialist Party, he was becoming a rising star, but it was mostly overt. Then they got strength, and then they pressed forward. But it wasn't until he got into a position of power where he had no more fear, and he could simply do whatever he wanted. And that's where we've kind of gotten to this point. So there's a couple of things that sped it up. Well, let's just go back to the 40s, right? When that really started to gin up and things started to change for political reasons. The Secretary of Defense or of War changed to the Secretary of Defense. The Department of War turned to the Department of Defense. Later on in the years of Jimmy Carter, for instance, the Department of Education was set up. We didn't even have a Department of Education before that. So these are different signs that this was occurring. What is interesting about Naomi Wolf, and I would love to interview her, is that because I still don't know if she's aware of this, but she was a part of the reason of the problem. She was a part of that. She actually was a consultant or an advisor to Al Gore and Bill Clinton. She was there as a part of it. And I don't know if she realizes that it was occurring then. It didn't just occur now. It was the pace at which it was occurring. Politicians, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, many of the establishment members of the Republican Party, these lifelong quote-unquote conservatives. They're not really conservatives, but they were like John McCain, for instance. Lindsey Graham has been there forever. All these different politicians that have been in there were either leftist, or a lot of the ones who said they were conservatives were actually careerists. That's like the two biggest seeds of totalitarianism. The left, the movement of the left, they can say whatever they want about Hitler and say that he was right and that he was a nationalist. He was a national socialist, right? He was just as much of a socialist as he was in love with the history of Germany. And so one will always outweigh the other. You can be a nationalist and love your nation, but believe in freedom. And you're never going to press for people to have to follow what the nation says, or that the national government should be centralized and oppress the people. That's a socialist type of mentality, not a nationalist type of mentality. So that's where the things about Hitler not only get confused, but it gets manipulated by the left. But so these unholy seeds of leftism and careerism have fed this evil family tree for years and years and years, 80 years at least. And it moved at a pace that was very slow as it progressed. And then I would say after Ronald Reagan, during Bush 41, it started to speed up, because Bush 41 was one of these careerists. Then Bill Clinton came along. Bill Clinton's a leftist. The military changed. Federal law enforcement changed. Federal agencies changed. All the while, Bill Clinton did what he's best at, which was keep the status quo while these leftist things were occurring. Then George Bush 43 got in office. And he didn't, after 9/11, immediately he carried out his portion of leading the country to totalitarianism, which was by increasing the ability of the surveillance on American citizens. Now, I was in the FBI, and I do know how the Patriot Act was used for good. But the problem is when you increase the security to that level, if it is not overwatched closely by people who understand the Constitution and freedom, it will be manipulated by those who know the Constitution and freedom and they don't like it, and they will manipulate it for their benefit. And that's basically what happened. So Bush 43 progressed that, at least surveillance on the American citizens, and putting us in wars that weren't going to solve anything. He sent that home like a major league batter. He just unbelievable how he pushed things forward and accomplished little to nothing. Obama came into office. Still, it did speed up considerably, but still it was going at the pace at a faster, but not quite a sprint yet, or a run, because he was building the corporate version of the left. During the Obama 8 years, that's when Silicon Valley really took off. That's when social media took off. That's when all these leftist CEOs somehow mysteriously got into power. That's when Wall Street turned left. Weird things occurred during the Obama administration, but it wasn't necessarily a sprint. What changed it was Trump. President Trump came into office. The left went crazy. It wasn't Trump that changed the pace. It was Trump being in office when they thought it was going to be Hillary Clinton. They would have still been going at a medium pace. Also, the squad, people like AOC and all these other young people that got in there, and also other people who had been in government for a long time, but they realized that they had to act now because of Trump. They started pushing the pace faster and faster. That's why AOC and the squad and Nancy Pelosi didn't get along, because Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the old school wanted to go slower. They want to go at an even pace because it had worked, and they were chipping away at the fabric of America. The new people came in, and then Trump got elected, and all of a sudden they said, we got to pull the jackhammers out, the TNT and the big wrecking ball, and we got to start tearing stuff down now, fast. And that's what they did. And after they did that for a while, a couple of years, there was no reason to stop. They realized, or their dream had come to realization. They owned media. They owned social media. They owned the big money donors. They owned the special interests. They owned the deputy directors in all these different agencies and the senior executive service political appointees. They own all of them. And so they didn't have to slow down. And so here we are. We've reached this level where instead of a totalitarian leader, we have totalitarian political parties that people have just bought into. No matter what the Democrat Party says, the leftists are going to believe it. No matter what. And that has occurred in history over and over again. I talked to Drago about Poland, and it is unbelievable how that continues to happen. How what happened there is happening here. That the young people are basically just begging for socialism and totalitarianism. They don't even realize. They think that Trump was a totalitarian. He was nowhere close to a totalitarian leader. Trump was a nationalist who loves this nation, but not a socialist. So he wants you to be free. On the left, it's not like that. They are socialist, remember. And listen, I've had this discussion before. Socialism is the gateway to communism, right? Very few countries actually jump straight into communism. They go to socialism first, and then they get the people massaged into government control and centralized government, and then they take full control, and then they don't care what the people think. And they do that in ways through division and making people think that they're oppressed and they have to stand up against this other group of people, and that's what's occurred. But to say that it's happened fast, it hasn't happened fast. It's just that there's been a quickening of the pace. That's what's occurred. So I think probably next to Yuri Bezmenov, even though she gets that part wrong, I think what Naomi Wolf has to say is probably, well, first of all, let's just be honest, okay? I was saying this a lot long before Naomi Wolf was saying this. She said she's been doing 12 years of investigation for her book and studying history. Well, I've lived it, and many others. I'm saying myself. I'm not trying to take credit for everything, but I've been on national radio screaming about communism since 2014. I got out of the bureau in 2013, and I quickly realized what was going on. And at the end of 2013, April's when I started being on television and radio a lot, and then I started hosting in 2014, and I was screaming this the entire time. Once you see it, which is what's happened to her, is once you see the reality of what's occurring, you can't close that off and ignore it. You just can't. The only way, I mean, you could be like the guy in The Matrix. I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Matrix, where the guy said, you know, he knows that everything, that the world that they live in is fake, but why would I want to leave it? I can have a nice steak whenever I want it. I can smell this, perfume or whatever. He said, why would I ever leave this place? Why would I want to be out of this place? Well, very few people who see the reality of loss of freedom are ever going to settle for fake freedom. And I think where Naomi Wolf is now and what she's seeing now, many of us have been seeing this for half a lifetime. And what's amazing to me, though, is how people on the left who, were in war, who are the descendants of people who were in concentration camps in Germany, how they don't see this. It's amazing to me how they don't see this, what's occurring. And they hated Trump and they love the left. It's mind-boggling to me how they don't see this. So, look, this is important stuff for you to realize, because I think out of all the things that she said, right, which was warnings, probably the most important thing she said is that if we don't act now and fight this, that window is going to close and you're not going to be able to fight it. You literally would have to physically fight. And I think what's happening with Cuomo here in New York, what's happening with Gavin Newsom in California, that's part of the fight. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to go after somebody like Cuomo and not stop. That's a perfect storm, what's happening to him. And I hope it really does go forward. So this is very important for you to realize. And listen, I'll say this one other thing. You know, the problem with what's happening now with Cuomo is that people are going to build false hope in other politicians. Ron Kim, who's actually got a wake-up call as well, is a socialist. He's really far left. I've met him once. I've never had a chance to sit where I was at a rally with him and against Cuomo. That what she was saying about the left and the right coming together, the same thing with Cuomo is occurring. But if we give these people too big a props, it's no different than any other leftists. It's mind-boggling to me how they can come out and fight against Cuomo all the while. If you were going in their meetings, you would probably see that they're still talking about stuff that is not just bad decisions, it's leftist decisions. And all of this that's occurring, wherever there's progression in a nation, where the progressives exist, or the people who have a better idea for the way things should be, you can typically find that the nation is going down the road of socialism, which will lead to communism, which will lead to nothing in this nation. Now, the quickening that you see that I talk about in this episode 156 of The Experts, this quickening of tyranny, of control, not just at the national level, but at the local level with dictators like Cuomo and Gavin Newsom in California. This quickening isn't just occurring. It's been going on for years and years, in some cases 80 years. The tactics that leftists are using now is only made possible by careerists in Washington, D.C., and by those on the left that ultimately want a totalitarian state, which they are getting. I'm Jonathan Gilliam. This is The Experts. The truth has arrived. Peace, and I'm out of here.